when I say somebody's micromanaging, I mean, what I mean is they're making decisions and, way lower in the organization than they should be, right? They're basically, they're doing other people's jobs. Sometimes that is necessary. The analogy I like to give is if a person is drowning in a lake, that's not the time for me to stand there and coach them on how to swim, right? If they're failing, I need to go in and I need to drag them back to shore to safety and then teach them how to swim. Right?
Hello. Welcome to another knowledge bomb episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Chris Seifert.
And if this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps get the word out to great leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself.
Please help me welcome Chris with Ending Micromanagement and Empowering Decision Makers.
This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
A little over 25 years experience in industrial and operating environments. Started my career in the U.S. Navy, spent 8 years on active duty in the submarine force. Got out of the Navy and went to work in manufacturing for first Georgia Pacific and then Owens Corning. Was a plant manager for those two companies at several different plants, and then took a detour into consulting. I spent about 6 years as a partner in a consulting firm, mostly working with large oil and gas, chemical companies, really companies in high hazard, complex operating environments. And with them, I took a lot of the principles of operation that I learned from the submarine force, and how do we apply those to these high hazard industries. And then my last operating role, I was the vice president of operations for the world's largest biomass manufacturer. Actually started with them when there were 4 plants and about 400 people, about 350 million in revenue. And we grew that business to 14 facilities, 1,500 people, and about 1.3 billion in revenue. And so about a year ago, I decided it was, kind of take a step back from that. It obviously was a high growth, very, very busy time. And throughout my career there, one thing that I'd always seen was that, the folks struggled with was decision making, right? All my teams that I had worked with had really, something that I felt like was a gap in the marketplace was helping people be better at decision making. And where that was really manifesting itself in particular was that I saw a lot of leaders who were ending up micromanaging. They didn't necessarily want to be micromanagers, but they were feeling like they had to be. I've been in that position myself, and really wanted to help with that. So I wrote a book called Enabling Empowerment, and then started the firm with the same name and released that about a couple months ago.
I want to talk about this book because you said something. You talked about you found yourself in the same situation with the type micromanagement, maybe doing it and wasn't aware of it. So I kind of want you to talk about that. How did you identify what you were doing and others making decisions and enabling individuals to be empowered? What was your aha moment in the situation?
Yeah. Well, so look, first, sometimes, I was doing it and I knew I was doing it. And frankly, I think in the moment, it was the right thing to do. And that's, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions, right? So first off, when I say somebody's micromanaging, what I mean is they're making decisions and, way lower in the organization than they should be, right? They're basically, they're doing other people's jobs. Sometimes that is necessary. The analogy I like to give is if a person is drowning in a lake, that's not the time for me to stand there and coach them on how to swim, right? If they're failing, I need to go in and I need to drag them back to shore to safety and then teach them how to swim, right? And Look, there have been times where, either I took over a plant or, when I was vice president and I was responsible for 14 facilities, there were times where there was a facility that, I mean, frankly, it was failing so bad that its continued existence was in question, right? I mean, there
Yeah.
were people talking about shutting it down.
Mm.
And the reality is that's not the time to go in and like, hey, everybody, let's, coach you on making decisions. That's where, look, you guys are doing some things that need to stop right now. And
Yeah.
there's some things you need to start doing. And we have to be directive because we've got to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
But the challenge lies in, okay, maybe I did that on purpose, but how do I get out of that? Because that is
Mm.
not a sustainable way to operate, right? It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
Now, and then there are times as well where, I inherited a facility where the previous leader had been a micromanager, right? And
Mm.
and maybe I didn't recognize it at first, but I have over the years learned to recognize some of those signs that this culture has come into existence. And a couple of those are, people were constantly asking me what I wanted to do, and
Mm.
my response to them was like, wow, what I want to do has nothing to do with it. What is the best thing for the business? That's what I want to do, right?
Uh,
And what I'd really like you to do is I'd like you to make a recommendation on what you think we should do.
yeah.
Um, and so, that's one thing I've learned to listen for is people asking, what do you want me to do? Another one is where people are basically avoiding accountability by saying, well, I'm just doing what the boss told me to do. Right. I
Mm.
mean,
Yeah.
that's what I was told to do.
Yeah.
I think those are the two most obvious signs that you've got a culture that has, been steeped in micromanagement, or I'll say this, maybe it's not micromanagement, but it's transitioned to what I call codependent decision making, right?
Mm.
We like nobody's willing to make a decision. They want the boss to make the decision. And sometimes, I've even seen, I have had plant managers who work for me. One strikes me where I went to visit his facility and, I didn't have a place to work. So I was hanging out in his office doing some work.
Mm.
And all day long, just one employee after another was coming to the door and knocking on the door and saying, hey, this machine broke. What do you want me to do about it? Hey, we've
Wow.
got a late order. What do you want me to do about it? Hey, this customer's mad. What do you want me to do about it? Right.
Wow.
And I mean, after a couple hours, I just looked at him and said, what are you doing? And he said, what? And I said, man, you're like, they're refusing they're not making any decisions on their own. They're dependent on you. Now, the reality was those employees actually loved him.
Mm.
And it makes sense because, they were able to, he solved all their
He did
problems,
everything,
right?
Yeah.
They didn't particularly like their job because the
Yeah.
facility, the plant wasn't running very well.
Yeah.
And I don't think they felt a lot of ownership over
Yeah.
the results, but him individually, they liked him because he was doing their job for them. So, so those are some of the, kind of situations that I learned to recognize and,
Yeah.
what I look for when I'm, talking to a leader or observing what's going on.
Yeah. Chris, this is what I want you to do because I'm listening. I'm listening to you. I'm like, wow, ouch. For me, problem solving is one of my strong points, right? So when someone come to me, I'm honored to be able to solve the problem. Then I feel good about myself for solving the problem. So I believe that there's other individuals on this podcast listening right now, other executives, directors and CEOs, and also entrepreneurs that's in the same situation, right? They feel like they're part of something, feel like they're doing something when that's going on. I want you to help us. What are some things that we can do today as leaders to kind of, even if we're tempted to do it, I mean, what is the right process and delegating and passing this on and empowering the individuals on the team?
Yeah. So look, I'll tell you, I feel the same way. I love a good problem, right? I will, give me a good problem to solve and I'll spend way too much time on it. Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately though, look, the challenge is when as you grow up as a leader, as you move up higher and higher in the organization, that can't be your job anymore. Right. It just can't be. And, for some folks, maybe that's something to consider is if that's really your strong suit and you love being a problem solver, then stay a problem solver. There's nothing wrong with that. Right. But if you're a leader, your job is to get more out of people right? To help them get more out of themselves even than they think is possible, right?
Yeah.
And so your job is really to coach and develop their problem solving skills, and
Mm.
instead of you solving the problem for them, right?
Right.
And so the biggest, right, like I said, the biggest thing that I've learned to do is to stop telling people what to do. And I personally have become, I mean, I like to describe it as I'm almost allergic to somebody asking me what to do. Right.
Wow.
Like when you say, "Hey, Chris, what do you want me to do about this?" I mean, I actually stop, and it's not about what I want. What I
Yeah.
want has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. It's what's the best decision, what's the best for the business. So let's talk
Wow.
about that. What's the best for the business, right?
That's good.
And so the thing that I've learned, and let me just tell you an example through a story, through a very practical example.
Okay.
My first plant after the Navy was a plywood plant, and it was about a 500 person plant. And I'd been there about 2 weeks, and the shift supervisor, who'd been there for many years, comes up to me and says, "Hey, Chris, one of the openings on the plywood press is broken." Okay, now in practical terms, what that means is the machine is running at 2.5% less capacity, right?
Mm.
And he says, one of the openings on the press is broken. What do you want me to do? And I thought to myself, man, I've been here 2 weeks. You've been here for like 10 years. What?
Yeah.
Why are you asking me what?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My response was, well, I'd really like you to make a recommendation. And I mean, he was shocked, right? He's like, what? That's not how this works. I come to the boss, I ask him what to do, he tells me. And so we then had this conversation where it started with, I said, seriously, give me some recommendations. Well, we could shut the machine down. Okay, what else could we do? Well, we could run it like it is, I guess. Okay, we could run it like it is for a day and then shut it down, right? And we came up with 4 or 5 options.
Wow.
So then we talked through, well, how much would it cost if we shut it down now versus how much would it cost if we run it at a derated capacity
Mm.
versus, the other options. And then once we'd done all that math, one of the options was better than the others, right? And the funny thing was, even then, he still was like, so which one do you want me to do? And I said, well, what does the math say? He said, well, that one looks the best. So I think we should do that. I said, great, let's do that.
Wow.
Right. And so really it was about teaching him how to think through that, answer the question, what is the best for the business?
Yeah.
The challenge was that whole conversation took me like an hour. Right.
Mm.
And there were 500 employees in that plant. So I wasn't going to have that conversation 500 times. That was not going to work.
Yeah.
So what I did was I started pulling in my supervisors and the leaders and saying, hey, listen, when you come to me and ask, when we have a problem or there's an opportunity you think we should pursue, here's how I want you to communicate that. I want you to first describe it to me. Then I want you to tell me what alternatives you've considered. Then I want you to talk to me about the risks associated with those. I want you to tell me what the costs and the benefits. And then I want you to make a recommendation,
Yeah.
right? Because when you do that, then I can hear your thinking process and I can coach you, right? And instead of
That's
just,
good.
blank, what should we do?
Yeah.
And as a result of doing that training, then instead of having hour-long conversations, I only had to have like 5-10 minute long conversations with people,
Amazing.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing, is recognizing that. I like to describe it when leaders are micromanaging or having to micromanage, having to operate at that level below. My view is it's rarely an issue of intention. Um, you know, Most leaders don't want to be doing I was getting phone calls 2 o'clock in the morning, three. My wife literally was like, "Hey, will you just go sleep on the couch? Because
Yeah.
I can't handle the phone."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
who wants to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's usually not intention. It's usually a capability, right, of the people and the capacity of the leader to fix the capability problem.
Yeah.
So
So you had an individual who came and you talked to them. Do you have them to, like, maybe a step where they
mhm.
come to you for the options, and then I guess maybe once you can trust them,
Yeah,
you let them, go at
yeah,
it or whatever. What's that process look like?
yeah. I work with that on two fronts. Okay,
Okay.
so first, let's talk about I taught them this decision making framework, right, that I wanted them to use when they made a recommendation to me so that I could coach them better, right? And first thing we did was say, hey, look, first off, you should be using this framework for all your decisions, but
Yeah.
it's not practical to like necessarily go through all the steps all the time, right? Write it out or anything
Yeah.
like that. But first, let's identify the really high risk decisions that we make.
Yeah.
And let's make sure we're very formal about using the decision making framework on those decisions.
Okay.
Okay. So if we're making a decision that maybe, pick a relevant number for your business, but that business, it was like, hey, if it's going to be more than $25,000, we're going to go through this process, right?
Gotcha.
If somebody could die while we're doing it, right? If it's very dangerous evolution we're doing,
Yeah.
or if we're going to make a big change to the production schedule, right? Like that's going to affect this.
Yeah.
So we're very intentional about saying on these high risk decisions, we're going to be very formal about using this decision making framework. We're going to write it out. Okay. Now the secondary effect of that is by people getting good at doing it in those high risk situations, they naturally start doing it less formally in less risky situations, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
The other thing then is to recognize that, look, decision making is a skill, right? We can learn it through training and we get better at it through practice.
Yeah.
And we're not all at the same level, okay? But the mistake that I see most organizations do is they basically give authority more based on role than based on capability. So in other words, like all plant managers have the same, ability to spend money, or all procurement people, or all project managers, or whatever, right? That everybody's in the same role has the same decision rights,
Yeah.
is what I'll call them. And the problem there is the only thing I know for sure is some of those people should probably have more decision rights and some should probably have less,
Yeah.
right? Because they're not all the same
Gotcha.
skill level at decision making.
Absolutely.
So what I do is set up a way where we say, hey, look, we're going to say we're all going to have decision rights based on our level of skill. So maybe when you come in as a plant manager, when you were working for me, maybe we start out at, hey, anything over 10,000, you need to talk to me about,
Yeah.
right? But then after we've had 3 or 4 conversations where you've explained your decision to me and I've said, that's a really, that makes a lot of sense. Now you're up to 50,000, right? And then after 3 or 4, now you're at 100,000. Well, and then maybe there's this other plant manager over here who, guess what? It's not going so well, right? His decisions aren't going so well. So maybe his 10 needs to be 5, right? And maybe, what I mean?
Yeah.
And so basically acknowledging that we're not all at the same level, that's okay, right? It's not about where you are. It's about where the growth rate you're getting, right? Like how much can you grow your decision rights over time, and being able to earn them, right? And then that way people, value it, right? And they have an incentive to be better at explaining their decisions.
Yeah. Wow, Chris, this is good. That is a knowledge bomb. You're really helping us on today. I want you to kind of give some, maybe share some examples of successful empowerment practices.
Sure. Look, I'll give you a couple of examples where we've, done exactly that.
Okay.
So one of them was around capital projects, right? So when I inherited the capital project, it was about $20 million, right, between these 14 facilities. And so we're getting ready to make the next year's budget. And, sure enough, like $40 million worth of requests have come in. Okay. And I said to the accounting, right, I'm kind of partnering with the engineering director and the accounting director on how we're going to manage this budget. And I was like, man, how did we do this in the past? Right. And they said, well, we really just told them what projects they were going to do, because how else are we going to figure this out? Right. We got $40 million worth of requests. So we literally did what I said. I said, look, I don't think that's the right answer because I don't know. Right. I mean, they know more about it than me, but we need them to make the decision. And so what we did was we pulled all these engineers together who had submitted all these projects, and we put them through the decision-making framework training, right? That said, hey, listen, when you're coming to me and asking for $1 million, here's the process you should go through before you you do that, and here's the way you should communicate it. And then we set up, we divided them up, and the director of projects and the controller and myself kind of took groups, and we coached them, right, as they went through and they redid all their capital project requests over several weeks, and we kind of coached them on making sure they were using that decision-making framework.
Yeah.
What we found 4 weeks later, when we said, everybody come back with all your requests 4 weeks later after you've had a chance to go through them, was we'd gone from $40 million in requests down to 17 million, right?
Wow.
And
Yes.
and I mean, a lot of them, I was like, well, what happened to this project? And the engineers just said, you know what? Because we went through the process, we figured out a better way to do it. We don't need it. We don't need that money anymore, right?
Yeah.
And more importantly, there's some tweaks to the way that I manage this. So one of the things I like when you're making a recommendation is to not use single point forecasts, right? So lots of companies will make their budgets or do their forecasts, and they'll say a number, right? Like, I think we're going to make $1 million. This project will make $1 million next year. The only thing I know for sure is whatever your forecast for that number was, it's wrong. It's not going to be that. Right? It's going to be more or it's going to be less.
Yeah.
And so those conversations tend to turn into arguments, right? They're an argument between the leader and the person making the proposal. Is it really $1 million, or is it $1,010,000, or is it 900,000, or what, you know what I mean? And it turns into this debate.
Yeah.
So what I did was I said, we're not going to have that debate. What I want you to do is I want you to give me a range. I want you to tell me what you think the best case is, and I want you to tell me what the worst case is. And then I want you to tell me what has to happen for the best case, and what can we do to prevent the worst case, right? And how can we do that? And so what that did was, I mean, the direct feedback I got from people was, Chris, this conversation was so much more productive, because instead of us arguing over whether my forecast was right or wrong, we actually had a conversation where you helped me think through the risks. And now I have some actions that I can go do to make sure that I get better about this, right? And so, things like that, where understanding, the other way I could have handled that could have just been like, hey, I'm just pushing all this decision back on you guys. You guys go figure it out. And I think that would have felt really horrible to them, right? I don't think they would have felt supported in that at all. And they would have felt like he's just looking for a way that when this goes wrong, he can say it's our fault, but instead, by saying, look, guys, the challenge here is I don't think we've thought through this correctly. Let me teach you how to think through it. And then let me provide you the, coaching. We can be in a materially different place.
Enabling empowerment. I want to talk about your book. I want you to give us a sneak peek into the book. I know you've been talking about it, but I want you to, from a perspective of who is this book for, and why should they read it?
First off, any leader who has a team that, right, and obviously, I mean, in any business, decision making is important. But I'll also say, just for any individual who wants to be better at making and communicating decisions. One of the things I will directly attribute, getting to be, vice president in a publicly traded company. I mean, one of the skills I think that made me able to do that was my ability to communicate my decisions. I mean, I got direct feedback from my, CEO, my COO, that, Chris, the way you explain your decisions to us makes us just so comfortable with the way you're thinking about it, right? There's a big difference between when an employee just comes up to the leader and says, hey, I think we should do this, right? Okay. I mean, the leader thinks, well, I mean, maybe they just guessed the right answer, right? I don't know how you came up with that. Versus when the employee comes up and says, hey, here's the problem or opportunity. Here are the alternatives I've considered. Here's the risks associated with each of those alternatives. Here's the benefits of why this one is the best one. I think we should do that. When you communicate with that way to me as a leader, now, I mean, boy, I leave that conversation thinking, boy, that person's a really good thinker, right? I have a lot more trust in their thought. I understand how you got to the right answer, right? So that's who the book is for. Look, in it, I make the case that decision making is a skill, and not only is it a skill, but it is a critical skill that is going to determine the success of your business, right? I mean, how good the decisions you make are will determine how successful you are.
Yeah.
And so you should be developing that skill. But I also make the case that one, most people aren't taught that skill, especially in a business decision-making context, right? A lot of my experience has been in manufacturing industries. And one of the things I discovered was, there's a lot of the engineers are taught great, how to evaluate the technical feasibility of equipment, but they're not taught at all how to connect that to, does it make money,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's great, all these features you want me to buy, but how much more money will we make for those features? But even besides that, the human brain is not wired for making decisions in complexity and uncertainty, right? So let me give you just an example of this. So Cedric, do you know how to pronounce the capital of Kentucky? Do you pronounce it Louisville or Louisville?
Louisville.
Okay. So you actually pronounce it Frankfurt. Okay. But what happened there was the way I framed the problem to you didn't allow you to think of an answer other than the two choices I gave you, right?
Yeah.
And so what that's called is the framing trap. And the way our brains work is our brains are not wired to question the frame of a problem that is given to us, right? Because if we did that all day long, if we questioned everything in front of us all day long, we wouldn't get anything done,
Yeah.
right? So we have a bias to accept the problem the way it's presented to us.
Yeah.
So one of the things like I work with in the first step of the decision-making framework is learning how to properly frame a problem, right? So I'll give you a great example is if you frame a problem, I need a bigger house, okay? What options do you have? Get a bigger house, don't get a bigger house, right? But if I reframe the problem, my ratio of stuff to house is too high. Well, now I could get a bigger house. I could get rid of some stuff. I could find an offsite storage space for some of my stuff, right?
Yeah.
I've got 3 solutions just because I changed the frame, right? And
Yeah.
so learning these, and there's like dozens of these. A lot of what I talk about is based on the work of a gentleman named Daniel Kahneman. Was the first psychologist to win the Nobel Prize in economics.
Okay.
And I think he did a great job of understanding these biases. What I've tried to do in the book is say, that's great that we understand them. What do we do about them, right? What do we do in a business, in a company, as a leader with employees? How do I prevent these biases from causing my team to make bad decisions, right?
Yeah.
Back to my capital example, that was with a lot of those $40 million, that was a problem. They hadn't framed the problem right. And when they reframed the problem, they were able to find all kinds of solutions that they couldn't before. So that's what we cover in the book. We go through each of the steps of the decision-making framework. We talk about the individual decision traps that in that step we're trying to avoid and what the best practices are. And then the final thing in the book, I give a lot of templates. So for instance, an Excel financial model that you could use to evaluate decisions, or a Word document that you can use to, I use to communicate my decision, or, little tip sheets with how to frame a problem. And all those are also those references or templates are all available on the website. So, it's really intended, the full title is Enabling Empowerment, a leadership playbook for ending micromanagement and empowering decision makers. And I really tried to make it a playbook, meaning like, hey, here's the steps and, here's the tool, right? If you need a tool, here's a free example that you can use.
Yeah. Chris, I'm definitely excited. Listen, I'm telling you, I'm so excited, man. I just purchased the book. It's going to be
Awesome.
in Sunday for me. I just made the purchase and I'm excited about it, man, because I'm listening to you and I'm learning so much. I'm like, man, I got to get this book in my hand because it's so overwhelming, all the information that you're sharing, this perspective. And I really love it because this is something that me personally, I can use to not only develop those around me, but expand what I already have. If there's any like a success story, something you've seen like that, maybe coach someone or they read your book or some just a success
Mhm.
story on what was the outcome and at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it dozens of times where by pulling people in and giving them that opportunity to participate in the decision making process, they they feel more connected and more they feel like they're contributing, right? What I've learned over the years is people engaging, right?
Yeah.
Which I like to call, I like to refer to it as discretionary effort. How much discretionary effort are the people willing to give me, right?
Yeah.
Um, and because to me, that's the measure of engagement, right? If they're just coming, if they're doing the bare minimum to keep the job, like that's not engaged. It's I'm going up, I'm willing to go in above and beyond. And there's a lot of view that what it takes to get people to do that is it's about the perks or it's about work-life balance or it's about how we talk to them or recognition and all these kinds of
Yeah.
things. And to, what I've found is, look, not like you can have great all that stuff and still have a horribly disengaged workforce, right? And in fact, you can have none of that stuff and have an extremely engaged workforce. I mentioned I was in the Navy in the submarine force. You know what you don't get in the submarine force?
What's
You
that?
don't get work-life balance. You don't get to work from home, that's for sure. You don't get a nice, comfy work environment, right? You're living in a tin can with 150 people underwater for 3 months at a time. You're not getting paid well, but yet everybody's really dedicated. Why? Because there's a mission that they believe in, and they
Mm.
believe that they can impact the outcome. Right? They get meaning from it. Right? I'm doing something here. Right?
Yeah.
And so by giving, when your team feels all of a sudden like they have the ability to influence the outcome, then the engagement level increases, right? So, you know, there was a plant to your point, like we were talking about where, I mean, look, they were borderline, like we were going to shut them down. I mean, that was the questions I was getting, like, why are we not shutting this plant down, right?
Wow.
And, yeah, I went in and initially we had to micromanage to stop the craziness, but we taught the team how to make the decisions and said, you're going to come in here and you're going to start making recommendations, right? You're going to go through every morning, and this isn't going to be Chris tells you what to do all day or the plant manager tells you what to do all day. You're going to have to start making recommendations, and here's how. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you, we saw guys that went from couldn't get out of that plant fast enough, right? I mean, like you know what I mean? Like 2:30 would roll in the afternoon would roll around and we couldn't find them and
Yeah.
the plant was down, to we couldn't get them to go home. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Because
Listen.
all of a sudden they felt like, look, here's the difference. When I tell you, hey, you need to go get these, 3 machines up and running.
Yeah.
That's what we needed. That needs to be the focus today, right? You don't own any of that outcome, right? Like you're just told to do that. And
Yeah.
you're going to probably do that and only that and nothing else. And if it doesn't work, you don't really care. You're going to say it was my fault, right? But
Mm.
when I ask you, what needs to be the priority day? What do we need to do before we go home? And you tell me we got to get these 3 machines running. And I say, fine, that's good. That's it then. Go do that. What happened? Now you own it. Like
Yeah.
you're the one that told me that. You said we shouldn't go home until those 3 machines are running, not me, right?
Yeah.
You said that. And
Wow.
so now you're going to be more invested in making
Got
sure
you.
that that actually happens and that has the result that we wanted it to, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, man, Chris, this is good. Is there anything that you said maybe prior to this interview on today? You said, you know what, I really want to make sure the Lead to Greatness get this from the book. Is there anything that maybe a question I didn't ask, anything that you want to share with us
mhm.
to enhance us in our organization, our leadership? What would that be?
Yeah. Just if you are not being intentional
Mm.
about improving the decision-making skills of your team, I would just really encourage you to start being intentional,
Mm.
because, like I said, it's a skill, right? And it can be developed. And at the end of the day, the quality of your decisions will determine the outcome for your business. And if your competitor is out there being intentional about making better decisions, they're probably going to pass you. So, it needs to be something that is deliberate. I see way too many times I go, talk to organizations about what is in their leadership development program. And they have things like, how to give performance feedback and conflict resolution and, just things like that about, relationship management. And those are all important, right? Yeah. Those are good. But then they're ignoring decision making. And the fundamental thing we're doing is we promote people into new roles as they go higher in the organization. We're giving them more decision-making authority. And so if we're not being intentional about it, we're just assuming they're going to get better through trial and error. Jeez. And that doesn't seem like a very good strategy, right?
Yeah. Chris, knowledge bomb. Chris, thank you so much, man. This was amazing. Chris, what are some practical leadership growth tips, tool, advice that you can share with the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
Always be learning and be critical. I mentioned the Daniel Kahneman, right? His book, another one I would highly recommend anybody read, is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And now look, it's a difficult read. I think hopefully mine is a more digestible, right? I mean, he's a like I said, he's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist, and it reads like that, right? I mean, it's very, very intellectual, but it really made me learn to question like my own thinking ability. You've probably heard that before. Like the more you learn about something, the more you realize how much you don't know. Right?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like whenever I'm around somebody who's like thinks they're an expert in something, they're not, right? It's the person who's like knows that there's so much stuff they don't know that actually knows a lot. Absolutely. It has really caused me to, think about how much I'm influenced by, just my environment and my decision making, and to be very deliberate and questioning about, am I really doing the best thing? So just always be learning and always be questioning, what's going on.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that. If someone wanted to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Well, the best place is the website, www.enablingempowerment.com. As I mentioned, there's all kinds of resources from the book there. There are blogs there. I write new blog articles at least weekly on different decision traps. Like, hey, here's a decision trap that, you can fall victim to. Here's some best practices. Exploring, hey, new frontier. Are we going to, how is AI susceptible to the same decision traps, right? Newsflash, to some degree, yes, it is, right? It falls victim to decision traps too. So lots of things like that we'll explore. My contact information is there. And then you can also find me around on LinkedIn as well.
Oh, awesome. On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so very much, Chris, for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to your folks there.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you for joining us today on the Lead to Greatness podcast. So remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace.